Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. Today we're taking a look at the new best decks for this most recent season, aka the December 2024 season, with the announcement of the new Gimmick Puppet and White Forest cards, as well as a few others, like Trickstar and the like. Yeah, just what are going to be the best decks to climb in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So let's quickly hop into this. Here are the tiers. I have 1, 2, 3, Rogue, and everything else. And real quick, I do want to specify, because I do believe that there is a lot more that is playable in ranked that you can just kind of like play and do well with. So there's that. If I were suggesting something for like the Duelist Cup or for a tournament or something like that, I think a lot less is playable, so it'd probably just be tier 1 and 2 and Rogue. But yeah, that's why I have so many tiers. Because for ladder, I think there's a lot more that's playable and a lot more that you can have success with. So yeah, let's just quickly start off. I believe this is in like alphabetical order. It could be in some other order as well. Starting off here with Branded, I think Branded is solidly tier 3. The thing with Branded is that it's not actually very good, but Branded players are only ever going to play Branded, and they make it look really good. I don't think it's actually all that playable though. And I wouldn't necessarily suggest it for something like climbing. Yes, it consistently is in like the top 10 highest rated decks in the new, or at the end of the seasons and stuff like that. But I think that is more so due to the dedication to Branded that players have, rather than necessarily the power of Branded. I think it's just fallen off at this point. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up, we have Centurion, which I'm going to solidly put in tier 3 as well. I think it's similar in nature. Centurion players will tell you Centurion is crazy. Anyone else with knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! Will tell you Centurion is, like, okay. And that's, you know, coming from, like, Joshua Schmidt, who's picked it up, and Pack TCG, who's also picked it up, and a bunch of other, like, actual top players. So as far as I'm concerned, it's okay. It's functional. So, yeah. Chimera. Rogue, maybe? I think it's getting some new cards as well, thanks to, like, Silhouette Rat and some of the White Forest stuff. But honestly, I don't think Chimera is realistically doing anything unless they draw a God Hand, which they always seem to do against me. Or if they have a miracle happen? I don't know. Like, realistically, I don't expect them to do much against a lot of the other top of the metagame, so there's that. Dragon Link has one distinct problem, and that is Maxi. And with the limitation to Gamma, I do think that hurts them the most, because they can still play Gamma, because playing Gamma is just good for them, right? Being able to dump Driver for the effect of the other Red Eyes target that you definitely want to search. So yeah, for the most part, I don't think that Dragon Link, I don't know. Maxi is a huge issue. Losing a Gamma matters, but overall, like, I still wouldn't put it up that high, mostly due to the fact that Maxi does hurt it quite a bit, and it's not quite as powerful as it used to be. So there's that. Next up, we have Live Twin Sprite, which is Rogue. It's just like the worst version of Sprite. If you're wanting to play Sprite, play a different version of Sprite. Live Twins are terrible right now. And if you're gonna just play Live Twins, don't. Exosister is just really bad right now. In theory, Exosister is good. In practice, it's not, right? In theory, you're like, oh, but there's like a bunch of decks that like interact with the graveyard, and like being able to special summon the guy from the grave is great. But the problem is that it dies to hand traps, it dies to board breakers, it dies to everything. It loses to like singular points of interaction a lot of times, right? Sure, it can play through a lot of stuff, but most of the time it doesn't, right? It's like Martha or bust. So yeah, it's just not all that great. And a lot of decks can just play through the interruptions at this point, especially like Shifter in a Tenpai format is just not, that's just ain't it, chief. Next up, we have Fire King. Most notably, Fire King Snake Eye, I still think is one of, if not the best deck of the format. We'll talk about one of the other options for that as well. But yeah, this deck's still insane. Still has an insane grind game. Still able to compete. Most notably, it can still compete with Tenpai, because it can play through multiple hand traps, right? It can. A lot of the board breakers don't actually do all that much against this deck, mostly due to the fact that it can play back row and monsters, which matters quite a bit. as well as being able to interact from grave, and it's very, very difficult to put down, especially with the Fire King cards in particular, interacting so well against a lot of the Tenpai stuff, because of just the way that they work, right? Like, what is your opponent going to do against a Garunix in grave? Unless they're able to make Transcendent Dragon through your other interactions, probably nothing, right? And then on top of that, it can play a bunch of, like, non-engine as well, so it's just great. Hero's Rogue. Hero will always be Rogue. Hero is the definition of a Rogue deck and will never not be a Rogue deck because it continues to get support to make sure that it's right at that peak level. I feel like I don't need to explain this one. You should just know. I'm going to put it somewhere near the bottom. Kashtira is interesting. I think Kashtira as an engine is phenomenal, and as a deck itself is terrible. The thing is, Kashtira by itself doesn't do anything. Unless you get a really strong start, right? Which is one of 4 cards right now. That is either Unicorn, Field Spell, or technically speaking, you could also do Fenrir, but Fenrir is also significantly worse. Now, also technically speaking, you could play Planet Pathfinder, and that would also take up your normal, which could give you Unicorn, which could give you full combo. In theory. But realistically, that's what, 7 cards that potentially do anything in the deck, and that can also die to singular hand traps. So, not exactly great, but I think the Kashtira engine is fantastic. I think Unicorn is really, really strong right now. Being able to start your combo with a Unicorn on the field means that if your opponent does interact with you with a monster effect, you get to look at what they're doing, and this is great against Tenpai. Just being able to, like, rip a card out of the hand, or not out of the hand, out of the extra deck is insane. So, yeah. Kashtira's, I'll put it in tier 2, but there's my explanation of it. Labyrinth, I think, is still tier 2. Having the ability to kind of ignore a lot of cards that just really hinder a lot of other decks, as well as being able to play just a myriad of back row that can entirely invalidate things like Tenpai, things like Yubel, things like etc. Makes it a lot better, right? You don't really care about Shifter, because if your opponent Shifters you, you just set 5 and then you pass, or you could, like, you know, activate the Furnishers in response or something along those lines. So it's not really that big of a deal, but yeah, there you go. Labyrinth is still very good. I'm actually going to put it above Cash. Pendulum, I think, is fine. The thing is, Pendulum looks a lot better now than it did in the past, and that is for 2 reasons. 1, people are just kind of playing high roll strats to just kind of auto win the game, because if you don't automatically win the game through like an FTK or through a pseudo FTK by basically preventing your opponent from playing the game, Tenpai is going to kick your teeth in and absolutely kill you. So everyone's just kind of playing, well, F it, we ball. And Pendulum is just one of those decks that happens to do better in formats like that. So I don't actually think it's all that great, but it's going to look like it's significantly better. Mathmech is fine. It has the same problem as Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link's just stronger. But yeah, Mathmech does Mathmech things. Pearly I think is still solidly tier 2. I still think it's a very strong deck and has a lot of grind game to it, and even with the limitations to the deck, I still think the deck is really, really great. It even plays into Max E really well, so there's that. Yeah, I just solidly think that this is a good deck. Next up, Rescue Ace. Rescue Ace I think is extremely heavily slept on, especially in Master Duel. I think for TCG players, we know how good Rescue Ace was. And for OCG players, or just people who played Master Duel, we didn't really have that long of a stint with Rescue Ace being all that playable. However, yeah, it's great. It's a fantastic deck. It's basically Fire King Snake Eye, but, like, slightly weaker. But they kind of do the same thing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Rika is rogue at best. I don't really feel like I need to explain this one. It's just worse than these two. It's similar nature, big combo deck that does a million actions and dies to the roach. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up we have a Ritual Beast, which I'm gonna put it here. I'm actually gonna move Pearly down. Ritual Beast is good. It's a nice solid deck. It's another big combo deck though, but it just happens to be the best one because it can abuse things like Shifter and stuff like that. Now with Shifter going to 1, that matters significantly less, but even with that being said, it's still a nice combo deck with some very solid end boards, most notably with Protoss being in the mix. It makes it a lot better. So if you end up knowing what your opponent's playing, like for example, you lose the coin flip, your opponent makes you go first, you can easily declare fire and be like, cool, I'm not dealing with Tenpai there. And there's that. Also, there's just like a lot more fire decks to worry about in general. So being able to call either fire or dark is very nice. So all in all, it's still a very solid deck and has a lot of room to just kind of like win the game on the spot. On top of that, you can also make Colossus if you don't want to make Protoss. So yeah, strong deck because of that. And outside of that is honestly still not bad. It's still a good strat. Tearlaments Great is Rogue. It's fine. I don't want to talk about that one too much. Next up we have Snake Eye. Snake Eye, I think, with the addition of the White Forest card. Actually, the White Forest cards don't actually do anything for Snake Eye, but I do believe that Snake Eye is still a very strong, competent deck. And I would highly suggest playing Snake Eye, just like in general, even with like other engines, more so as an engine. That sounds kind of weird, but like, yeah, that's basically what Snake Eye is at this point. So pairing this with Kashtira, pairing this with Fire King, pairing this with pretty much anything, because there's not really any reason not to just use it as a bunch of material. And it has been in a ton of different decks for similar reasons. And yeah, it's because it works. So there you go. Snake Eye is incredible. Still one of the best decks. Moving on. Sprite. Yeah, Sprite decks in particular are very strong. I think Tri-Brigade Sprite's probably the strongest. You could also play more of a like pure variant of Sprite, where it's just like a whole bunch of 2s that summon themselves effectively. And you can do that. That also works. But yeah, Sprite's still incredibly strong and definitely playable. Maybe not above Burly. Yeah. Stuns Rogue. It's always Rogue, pretty much. It's playable. It works. Not consistently, but yeah. Super Heavy Samurai. Honestly, Super Heavy Samurai is really popular right now as an engine, as like Wakaushi and like 2 other guys to just do a full combo, and then like normal summon a Centurion or something like that. The problem with this is that it dies even more heavily to Max E, because you're having to cut additional like non-engine to fit in this additional engine. So I don't necessarily think that it's all that good, but like it's not terrible, and Super Heavy Samurai is still not terrible. So yeah, there you go. Tearlaments, a phenomenal deck to play right now in the current metagame, especially for climbing. I'll still say it, even with the new ban list. The 1 snow kind of doesn't matter. Not much changes there. Everything else like didn't matter, and in fact is kind of boosts to Tearlament, right? Most notably Shifter going to 1. But all in all, Tearlament is still incredibly strong, still incredibly powerful, and yes, it does have like cards and decks that can very easily beat it. The problem is, not a lot of those decks are very popular, and it matches up well against a lot of these other decks, right? Most notably, it matches well against Tenpai, because a myriad of reasons, actually. I was going to say, like, oh, because of this, but then I thought of, like, 4 other reasons. Scream is very good, right? Being able to play on the opponent's turn is very good. Being able to have a big, unoutable guy, like Kit Kalos? Not Kit Kalos, sorry. Kaleido Heart? Incredible. I guess he's not unoutable, but, like, he's very difficult to deal with properly. Right? You can also, like, go full balls to the walls combo and end on, like, infinite interaction with like infinite recursion as well. So there's that. And because Curious still exists, you can still just dump the snow to the graveyard at the end of the combo anyway. So yeah, it's still really good and does a lot. So there you go. Yeah. Next up, Tenpai. Tenpai is one of the best decks. Yeah, it's just a coin flip deck, pretty much. With slight advantage, it's slightly weighted on its side, because First of all, you make your opponent go first, which is not great. But you still have the ability to kind of stop them through hand traps as well as through board breakers to basically prevent them from just immediately killing you, and then you can kill them with one card. So yeah, it's just kind of like a hope you draw it kind of situation. There's not really much to do with skill expression, and it's very strong. That's basically it. It probably has like a 55% win rate. I think it might be. It might be a little bit better, might be a little bit worse, but the point is, it's very strong. Next up, we have Voiceless. Voiceless I'm going to put in tier 2. I think it's great. Just a solid deck overall. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Difficult to out. Not really bad into anything in particular. Not really winning into anything in particular. Just kind of a, alright, do you have the outs to my board? Kind of similar in nature to Tenpai. But because it has to play with its resources more effectively, there's a lot more nuance and skill expression within the deck than something like Tenpai. So, yeah. Next up, Yubel. Yubel, I'm going to say, is the best deck right now. It didn't really lose much in the last ban list, and it's not going to lose anything in this ban list. So, not really much changes for it. It's just solidly the best deck. Well, not solidly, but it's one of the best decks. Extremely good for climbing. Has a decent matchup into Tenpai, has a decent matchup into pretty much everything else as well. And if you're wondering why I'm talking so much about Tenpai, Tenpai is the deck that everyone is playing. It's the most popular thing, so if you have a good matchup into that, you're going to do much better. So that's why like Tier is up here. I don't think Tier has like nearly as good of a matchup against like Yubel or against like Voiceless, which is kind of weird, but like, yeah. It also isn't great into like obviously Kashira and some of these other decks, but it has an insanely good matchup against Tenpai, because if they just make you go first, you go, cool, I'm going to full combo and end on a nigh unbreakable board with a ton of interaction, and then your opponent just can't do anything. Or, more specifically, can't do enough. Anyway, we'll talk about these three at the end. Tri-Brigade, I have already talked about with Sprite. I think Tri-Brigade is nice, but mostly paired with Sprite, so we'll not really touch on that one too much. Goblins are basically just a rank 3 turbo deck, which basically does the same thing as things like Rika. It's just a big combo deck. If it works, it works. If it doesn't really have a follow-up. If it goes second, it doesn't really have a follow-up. It just kind of falters. So there's that. Vanquish Soul, I think, is actually fairly decent and pretty competent right now, but not insane. Flunder got absolutely slaughtered once again and is now just in the dregs. Konami hates this deck, and it's pretty obvious. If they had gotten something back, like an additional map, or 2 additional maps, or an additional M-Pen, or something like that, I would maybe put it up, but at the moment I think it's just really, really bad. Let's talk about Trickstar first. Trickstar did get some new support. Too bad the support is absolute garbage and is genuinely not even worth considering. Trickstar is just not... It's just not it. Yes, Light Stage went to 3. Yes, they're getting new support. Does that matter? No. White Forest. This is the new archetype everyone wants, everyone likes, everyone thinks is cool, and it's maybe rogue at best. Here's why. As of right now, we don't know what we're getting. The problem is, White Forest doesn't do anything, realistically, without the Azamina cards. There's some things you can do with White Forest. It's not a whole lot. Most of the time it was paired in the TCG with Runic to pay for its costs. You could also play the Toy Box cards, which also pay for that cost. And the Azamina cards themselves pay for the cost of the monsters, so it's not really that big of a deal. But the point is that there's not really a whole big payoff for doing the White Forest stuff. So, like, it's okay, but it's pretty solidly a rogue deck. I don't think it's going to do a whole lot. It kind of depends on what we're getting, but if we're just getting the first wave of White Forest cards, which we're expecting, without any of the Azamina cards, none of those cards are, like, all that impactful. They're fairly decent, but they're pretty much wave 1 of 2 for the Azamina White Forest deck. And then Gimmick Puppet. Gimmick Puppet I honestly think is going to be pretty common, not due to the fact that it is very good, but due to the fact that it is an FTK. And when Tenpai, yeah, if you go first, Tenpai just dies. Like, literally, you FTK your opponent. Under the same restrictions that Tenpai has. Which is, here's an unaffected board, effectively. So, it doesn't even matter, you just activate Field Spell, make an unaffected board, and then FTK your opponent. It's pretty good for climbing. Now, granted, if Tenpai were to receive a nerf and become less popular, all of a sudden this deck becomes really bad. Because it's an FTK, and it's heavily reliant on that field spell being on the field. So, yeah, that's kind of it. But yeah, that's all that I have to say. Honestly, yeah, not much changed, all things considered, which kind of sucks. I wish, I wish we got Fiendsmith here instead. I understand it's probably right before a Duelist Cup, so they don't want to release something like Fiendsmith, but Fiendsmith's cool. I like Fiendsmith. Obviously, it's like extremely expensive in the TCG, which is why I haven't played it at all. But that doesn't mean I haven't played against it. But all in all, like, it's such a cool strategy because it, honestly, one, it changes the metagame, which honestly right now the metagame is awful. It's so unfun, mostly due to what people are doing because of this deck, because of Tenpai. And I'm not saying just Tenpai is ruining it, but because of the responses to Tenpai, the metagame kind of sucks. So I just want a shakeup, and I think Fiendsmith would be a great shakeup. Yeah, all of this stuff doesn't really change much. So that kind of sucks, but alas, here we are. Anyway, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.